So today I'm going to be using a teeny tiny grid on this hexagon. This is the same size of hexagon Skytone paper that I usually use, but instead of going to 64 grid divisions, I went to 80 because there was a discussion on that in my Discord server, and I'm going to be folding a brand new pattern that uses mostly basic twists with one double open triangle, which is like basic adjacent, and is going to have a weird symmetry that I don't know that anyone else has used before on this tiling. So I'm going to go ahead and start folding. This is a demonstration, not a tutorial. I'm just showing you how I would fold it. Welcome, Erlu. Welcome everyone watching. So I'm starting, and these are, you can see relative to my finger, teeny tiny little folds, since it is 80 instead of 64. I mean, 64 was already kind of small, but this is even smaller than 64 done on the diagonal. Actually, with that conversation on Discord about like how tiny of a grid can you reasonably do from these hexagons, and this one has 7 inches on each edge, so 14 from point to opposite point. And I actually did the calculation and saw that 64 divisions parallel to the edges is slightly smaller in terms of the space between parallel grid lines than 72 divisions parallel to the edge. So that 64 perpendicular is smaller than 72 parallel. And this is 80 parallel. Twisting that closed hexagon on around. And then usually I like to be very grid efficient, but this pattern kind of requires that I use some extra grid around the center. So instead of 2 pleat spacing, I'm going to leave 3 spaces. The through line is coming from the center. This is going to be a closed rhombus. I'll go around and get that on all 6 sides. Zoom a little bit more. It is quite teeny. Whoop, that's not exactly where I want that. And I'll just leave the triangle wraps as I set up my remaining rhombi. Deal with those in a moment. And I'm mildly optimistic that we'll get most of the way through this pattern in this hour, but not 100%. Like usually patterns folded on more than like 48 grid divisions take over an hour to fold. So we'll see how I'm feeling at an hour and whether I want to continue live or not. Bienvenido, Zach. So I think actually Zach was the one that brought up folding more than 64 divisions on this size of hexagon. So Zach, this is 80 divisions on, like with the large hexagon template, the 7 inches to an edge. Oh yeah. Yeah, zooming in is very helpful here. And this is the maximum zoom, the 2x that my camera can do. So I'm not going to be able to see any more than that. So far the grid's behaving really well. And the closer I get to the edge, the easier it'll be for me to manipulate the grid, because I'll actually be able to reach from the top and the bottom of the sheet, whereas right now I have to use different hands for the top and the bottom. So these triangles at this spacing, if I wanted them to be positions of symmetry, they would need to be open triangles. But for the symmetry in this pattern, those are all going to be closed triangles. And if you see me looking off to the side, that is where my crease pattern is. So I draw the crease pattern first, and then plan the grid, and then fold the grid and fold the piece. Okay, so then the next thing is I'm going to have tube pleat spacing in here for my next rhombus twist, and yeah, that is going to go into a closed hexagon on the same side, both above and below. Right. And I'm not going to get the whole hexagon at once here. That spacing is going to cascade around the whole thing. And once I've worked on both sides of the hexagon, I'll end up with a half hexagon tube. And these outer hexagons here are going to end up being positions of twofold rotational symmetry in the broader pattern. So you can see that these guys are definitely not positions of twofold rotational symmetry. That's got to move further out. How long to fold the grid? Maybe 2 hours. I usually estimate 64 fold grids at an hour and a half. So probably 2 hours, but it's not like I did it all in one go. And it's not like I did it without other entertainment. And heck, I probably even folded some other grids in between folding stages of this grid. So all of the twists, all of the moves here are very familiar. It's just that the symmetries are a little further spaced out than I'm used to. So I've got to keep on my toes and pay attention, especially when I'm starting each new ring around the center. Yeah, it definitely takes patience to fold a grid. For me, like it's a time of anticipation because I'm waiting to find out what the new pattern will look like. So I mean, no one's folded this before. I don't have any photos. I don't know yet exactly what it's going to look like. So folding the grid kind of is the price I need to pay to find out what this new pattern will look like. Oh yeah, you can totally take all day folding a 60 or 64 division grid. There's nothing that says that you have to fold your grids in one sitting session. So there's always room for flexibility. And like me, I'm always folding some grid or another. So it's like, okay, I know I'm going to grid. It's just a matter of what am I going to grid? Come on, little buddy. Oh, on screen. The half hexagon tube was wanting to dimple a little and not lay flat. Okay, so I've gotten all the way around the center. Now for the next ring, okay, so the next triangle outside of these is going to be the position of threefold symmetry, and it's going to be a double open. I'm going to work on the set of parallel pleats. So I'll start by finishing this hexagon. Making sure it twists all the way around. Yeah, it's funny, sometimes I do work on a teeny tiny scale like this, but it's usually just 32 divisions on these hexagons with 3 inches on each edge. And then this is with 16, I'll divide it further into 32. Yeah, getting into this folding, that is indeed the fun part. Okay, so I've got 1, 2, 3, this 4th, and I'm back to 3 spaces out, or 3 spaces between valleys. Just going to pop like that. And I don't get the whole rhombus yet, but I do get that double open triangle. And now, let's see. I want to finish this hexagon, but let's take this one plate at a time because I'm going to fold a rhombus up here. And now set those plates. Yeah, so earlier, I don't think I know what dyspraxic means, but yeah, we definitely each have our own challenges when it comes to folding tessellations, whether it's in the understanding or in the execution or in the patience to fold the grid. I've heard from lots of people who have lots of different challenges around folding tessellations. I would say well, a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but I would say my main challenge with with folding tessellations is actually getting around to folding all of the ones that I've designed, and not just like, or like this week when I sat down to write my Instagram captions for the week, I ended up designing 3 new patterns because I was thinking about like the symmetries involved in this pattern and in the one that I'm posting, and can I get a pattern that has slightly denser symmetries than this one and have that be using all simple twists. And I mean, simple twist, not quite. It uses open rhombus twists, which I don't quite count in the 8 basic ones. But I did figure out a way to get this outer hexagon in a position of 3-fold rotational symmetry without using any hybrid twists. So that'll be something exciting. Who knows, maybe I'll fold it for another of these demonstration sessions. But back to the topic of like challenges with folding tessellations. I've heard it from lots of people who are caretakers for their parents or other people who are ill, and then they're often in a situation that is not their ideal setup, like they're in someone else's home or in doctor's offices a lot, and their schedule is not something that they necessarily have control over. So it's more of an on-call situation, waiting for when someone asks for help. And there's all kinds of restrictions that come with that too, whether it's limited income, limited space to fold, poor lighting. Like if you're in a doctor's office and you're folding like on a clipboard, you do not get to control the placement of the lights. Although I have noticed, like when I do need to go in for doctor's appointments, you can make some choices about where to sit in the room that give better lighting for gridding. But yeah, all kinds of reasons. Beyond the fact that like tessellations are challenging to fold, everyone has more challenges that they bring to the table. Yeah, I can see where tessellations would be a really good workout for coordination of movements. So one of the great things about finding new patterns with basic twists and with fairly generous spacing is that the moves for this pattern are actually fairly simple. Not having to invent any new wraps or deal with like 5 layers bunching up in the same place, or worse, like 4 pleats bunching up in the same place. So that's going pretty smoothly. It still is like a whole bunch of teeny tiny twists. So we'll see where we're at the top of the hour. So we're getting to the last of this ring around the center, and I'm going to do a compound wrap here that I didn't have to do anywhere else because I'm working on top of an extra pleat. And that'll be my new rhombus. Now it's time for the next ring around the center, and I do actually have all the information I need on the paper already. So let's see. I liked working this way around, so I'll go with this rhombus. Yeah, I'll set them both up. That one and this one in here. And then that's feeding into a new hexagon, so that doesn't need to be an overlap. I've got my 2 triangle wraps, 2 rhombus twists. And if that looks like magic, it's not far from magic, but it is learnable. Basically, I was matching spacing on opposite sides of this hexagon in the 2-fold position. I knew I needed these triangle wraps. Those are going to both be closed triangle twists, and I didn't want to do overlaps through this rhombus that was partially set up. So that's what's going on there. And I'll find out as I do a bit more whether this hexagon is going to end up with more pleats. I mean, looking at this set of parallel pleats, it would have to. It's just a question of how much more and which part gets done first. So that's going to be not a copy of my center. It's going to be a copy of this guy. Okay. Let's see what happens. And it's not the longer plate, so it's going to be that triangle wrap, which is a bit of a pain in the rear. And that's going to lay down flat. Yes. And now squashing this triangle, I don't want to bind up that pleat, so I'll wrap. And then I have my 2 rhombi. And I am really glad at this point that I could reach above and below with the same fingers, or with the same fingers of the same hand. Get those guys in place. And flip to squash the triangle. And for the next edge, I'm going to try something a little different, which is setting up the 2 rhombi first and feeding back into that upper area. Because I'm not actually crossing into any existing twists by doing that. These are both going to be enclosed triangles. And then I need to resolve this effectively with 2 3-way intersections of mountains, one of which belongs to the hexagon and the other of which belongs to the rhombus. Okay, that was easier. I think Hello, hello. Welcome to the chat. And we're getting our lovely pattern taking place. One of the things I've noticed is that the further you put the symmetry points apart, the more organic the pattern looks. So a little something to consider if you're thinking about making your own designs. Of like, are you going for a geometric look or more of an organic look? And yeah, you can get either of those looks with still folding twists and pleats. Which I think is pretty cool. And like this tiling, the hex rom tri-rom, would not be my first choice for foldability, because like, sure, you can see the way I'm folding now is getting to good stopping points, getting to pseudo tiling breaks, but it's a little counterintuitive with leaving certain twists partially folded sometimes, or for a little while, coming back to them later. And it's really hard to predict what kind of border you're going to get. Let's see, squash the triangles. But yeah, we'll see what happens here. The convenient thing with this particular pattern is that the repeats are actually aligned on the same grid line, because the line's coming out from the hexagon, going through the through line of a rhombus, going into the next hexagon, going through the through line of a rhombus, going into the next repeat. So we shall see what will happen with that. I will say the pseudo tiling breaks are not aligned with the repeats. Not in the slightest. So I'm probably going to be folding this all the way to the edge. But with this particular pattern, folding all the way to the edge might still have a little bit of a border look. So sometimes people ask me which takes longer, folding the grid or folding the pattern. And there's not a simple answer to that. The more grid you have and the more complex the pattern is, the longer it takes to fold the pattern. Of course, so the pattern complexity variable, it's very, very clear that that would take longer to fold the pattern, but the same amount of time to fold the grid. If there's more grid, you take a little bit longer to fold the grid, but a whole lot longer to fold the pattern. So I think typically around 48, like 32 to 48 grid divisions, it starts taking longer to fold the pattern than the grid. And particularly, so I'm holding it up to the light for me, should hold it up to the light for you. Yeah, so with advent of TESS, those tiny pieces, like if you're already comfortable with folding those twists, that is going to be very similar amounts of time to fold the pattern as it was to fold the grid. But if you're folding more repeats, then you can see it take a lot longer for the pattern. And let's see, already here I've been folding for like maybe half to a third of the time that it took to fold the grid. And there's another like 3 times as much pattern to put on. So definitely going to get more pattern folding than grid folding on this piece. Okay, so got my set of parallel plates. I'm just going to be adding to that. I don't need to check spacing right now because I already have a rhombus partway set up. And this is going to be a repeat of the center, this hexagon. And once again, we're not going to see the whole thing in this ring around the center. We'll get a tube. And then this is feeding into a rhombus feeding into the next hexagon. So yeah, speaking of advent of TESS, like it's starting on Sunday. That's like 5 days away. I've got all the videos prepared for the first 12 days. And getting more of the emails set up today. So then I can actually relax over Thanksgiving and not need to be working the whole time between now and December 1st, which is awesome. And I've been sharing photos of all of the patterns in the Advent of TESS ebook this year on Instagram in my stories, saving them all in a highlight. It took almost 10 weeks at a daily pace to share out all of those photos. Let's see, here we have a guy here. And that is going to be closed because that's a copy of that. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I tried to price the ebook affordably at $25, but I know that's not always affordable for everyone. But at least with Advent of Tess, you'll be getting the smaller crease patterns. And I was showing in last week's live stream actually how to apply different symmetries to come up with your own patterns. Well, different symmetries and different tilings from those smaller patterns, getting into larger ones. So if you wanted to put, I don't know, 50 hours into it, you could recreate a lot of what's in the ebook based on the free crease patterns in Advent of Tess and my video last week with the free crease pattern templates. You would have to learn a lot about designing, but that's kind of my whole shtick, getting people to learn a lot about designing. But yeah, like I mentioned, there's that highlight on my Instagram page that has all of the photos from the patterns in the ebook. And I'll be posting photos of like fronts and backs of these extended patterns during December. So if you wanted to reverse engineer those, like this is me telling you, go for it. The other thing I'll say is like, and I know that not everyone has family who gives them presents for winter holidays. Like not all winter holidays involve presents, for starters, and not all families are in the position to give presents. But like, you could tell someone that you want the ebook and they could get it for you. And then I did also partner with Boyce and Origami Done. So some of those ebooks are going to be prizes in an upcoming origami done competition. And that would be another way to get your hands on, well, to get the ebook on your computer. It is only in virtual form. So this ring around the center is going very smoothly. Mostly just working on this side of the paper. I do have a little bit of like one triangle per side that I flip over to squash, which is interesting. In the tri tiling, I would be having 2 triangles for every other shape. But here I can go quite a ways without squashing a triangle. And right now we're 6 minutes till the top of the hour. And I can kind of tell, like in myself, that I want to keep folding. So I might just keep going until I finish here. I understand y'all have other stuff to be doing with your days. But that's why this is recorded. If you want to see how it ends. But I think that even if I stopped the video, I would probably keep folding. So I may as well stay on camera. And usually when I fold I would be listening to music or a podcast or something, but since I'm streaming this and didn't want to deal with copyright strikes, our entertainment, or my entertainment today, is talking to all of you in the chat and monologuing a bit too. So now we're back to a stable position. I've gotten all the way around the center. It's time to start the next set of parallel pleats. And let's see. I'm definitely going to be finishing this hexagon. It's just a question of whether the rhombus above it is going to get fully finished or just partially set up. And that looks like a fully finish to me. Making sure that's rotated all the way around. That pleat was already taken care of with finishing the hexagon. This guy is going to be a partial rhombus on the top and a triangle down below. And here I'm going to do a compound wrap as I set up my triangle. Should be getting back into more repeats of these double open triangles soon. This is going to be a full rhombus, and that is going to be a full rhombus. And there's where my double open triangle goes. On the opposite side of my twofold hexagon. Yeah, I haven't really looked into all of the copyright details on and there would be some copyright-free music that I could play, or like royalty-free and copyright available. But yeah, I haven't taken the time to look into that yet. Or rather, taken the time to actually set it up. Okay, this is coming into another hexagon. pleats. And there's probably also a way that I could stream this on both Twitch and YouTube at the same time. Would be interesting to figure out how to get the chat synced up. But there's definitely tools that can do that. It's all a matter of taking the time to figure it out. Luckily, my brain is very good at playing music for itself. And I had a choir rehearsal last night, so a couple of those songs are looping through my head. I should probably mention this is a double depth pleat with the triangle wrap, in case anyone is trying to fold from this demonstration. I'm working my way around and around and around. Yeah, I haven't even been keeping track, like, how many rings I've been doing around the center. It's just like, okay, this one's done, time for the next one. If I was looking at a tiling diagram, I might be more inclined to say like, oh, this is the 5th ring and therefore, but I'm just doing it on vibes really, and adding just one layer of twists on each pleat, which works pretty well for this styling. At that end, the rule is once you've done your first hexagon, you will never finish a hexagon in the same ring that you start it. Because hexagons are twice as thick as triangles, and rhombi, depending on their orientation, either take 1 ring or 2. But basically the rule is don't do anything that would run pleats through existing twists, and don't do anything that would cause too many overlaps. Yeah, Chris, what I'm doing with the hexagons is since they've already been half set up, it's easier to, and I'll talk a little more specifically when I have one in my hands. But like this one already has 3 pleats going into it, and it's been laid down flat. So then when I'm eventually going to squash it after a couple rhombus twists or rhombus and change are in place, I don't have it sitting up 2 spaces above the flat area. It's already down. And so now when I'm putting the 5th and 6th pleats going into there, I don't have it all as a tower. Instead, I'm pushing over this corner to where it needs to go, and then the next corner where it needs to go, and doing it kind of corner by corner. And that works because it was already mostly set up and flattened down. Yeah, the hands are looking big because the grid divisions are smaller than usual. Because I chose to do 80 grid divisions for this pattern on my usual size of paper, so hexagon with 7 inches on each side, because Zach brought it up on Discord, and I was like, I want to do this piece with 80, but I don't want to use one of my bigger hexagons. And so that is why the grid is looking extra tiny today. I'm zoomed all the way in, and it's still looking tiny. And ooh, one more of these double open triangles and I'll be all the way around. Okay. So Chris, with the hexagons, the bottom line is that because I'm not setting the hexagon up all in one go, I'm having to have it partially flattened before I get around to squashing the whole thing. I don't have that whole tower to bop, grab, and twist. Instead, I have a lot of stuff that's down closer to the table already that I'm opening up a little bit to get the last pleats in, and then making sure that it's rotated all the way around. So one of the cool things that I'm able to do, because this is a demonstration and not a tutorial, is I can actually fold on 80 grid divisions. We can see the full process. So imagine if this was a tutorial, we would be going into hour 3 or 4. It would probably be okay, I'm starting a new ring around the center. Here's what you do on this edge and how you transition into the next edge. And now I'm going to speed run. But here we're just speed running the whole thing. Yeah, it's not an easy number of divisions. But if you're comfortable folding fifths accurately and you've got your hexagon templates, then it's kind of reasonable. Yeah, exactly. If you want to do a crazy number of divisions, start smaller, do 16, 32, maybe 48, and then, yeah, 128 by 128. It really depends on what pattern you're working with, how easy that's going to be to fold. I mean, the grid itself is always the same amount of difficulty. Let's see, this guy is going to be a shorter spacing. And for me, what I'm trying to balance with my folding is getting through a large number of patterns. So even though I could fold 128 on everything, I tend to stick under 64 and do like a couple projects a year that are more than that, like if it really needs it. Because, yeah, I have neither the time nor the spare capacity in my hands to be folding 128 grid divisions every week. Yeah, I do know of Nermit's work, and I've seen that he has a nice book out, a lot of new flagstone models. Looks like a lot of pre-creasing things instead of folding one twist at a time. Mostly I make sure that if I'm going to fold a grid with that many divisions, I'm going to make sure that the paper will stand that. So like the two biggest pieces I've done were both 144 divisions on very large pieces of Skytone. And it worked out. It was a similar grid size in the end to this. But usually I stick to paper that I know is going to work. But actually, if you want to know like the craziest grid I've ever done, in terms of like literal insane, not numbers, I did a 64-fold triangle grid on a square of 6-inch kami, or 15-centimeter kami. You're used to those measurements. And I was able to fold a pattern. It was actually in this same tiling, lens stars. So yeah, you can do some crazy stuff. It's all possible. Well, Sushanth, A4 is a size, it's a measurement, not a paper type. It's not a quality. You could say printer paper, and that would be a quality. But you can get Skytone in A4, and that would work well. Mm-hmm. Yeah, different places in the world are going to have different papers that you can find cheaply and abundantly that are great for folding. Like, usually when I fold larger pieces, I mean moderately larger pieces, I do it on butcher paper, which is just like a roll of paper I got off of Amazon that is for smoking meat. So definitely nothing special in terms of like an origami pedigree or anything. But it works rather well. I actually did a live stream a month or two ago. No, it would have been October at the latest. I don't know, that's a month-ish ago, 2 months ago. Where I used the butcher paper for a pattern called Cosmic Vision. Ooh, yeah, earning money from origami tessellations. That is very difficult. Very, very difficult. There's a couple people in the world who do it, myself included, but it's not as easy or as much money as you might think. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm aware. But is that 5,000 US dollars or 5,000 Japanese yen? Because those are very different things. And the other thing is, like, how much time and effort did he put into to make that amount of money? Because he's been doing a lot of, like, intense video production for years and has just started to make more money off of it. Not to mention getting lucky on TikTok. So the important thing, as far as I can see it, for, like, successfully making money in any kind of origami, any kind of art really, is having something that's uniquely yours. And so, well, that and the perseverance to stick with it for a really long time, even while it's not making money, because it tends not to at first. So if you're willing to stick with it, like, sure, it's possible. It's just not easy. Yep, and if I remember correctly, he's doing a show in San Francisco now, too. No, no, I don't get bored folding origami. I'm usually listening to things, so that keeps things interesting, even if the folding itself wasn't, which I find folding these tessellations to, I mean, it's always a journey of discovery. Like this one, this particular one is like at the same time more complex and less complex than a lot of things that I fold. Like it's got complex symmetries, but it's based on a very simple pattern. So it's kind of in the middle there in terms of like things I have to pay attention to, because most of this folding that I'm doing is I do the first thing and that requires me to continue in a certain way. So I'm not having to always pay attention to, oh, how should I continue? It's just there's only one way forward. So that can feel a little more repetitive. But like, for example, when I show the backlighting at the end, that's going to be the first time that anybody in the world has seen this piece backlit, which I think is pretty cool. So that's part of what keeps me folding. What I would find boring is actually doing what De Hinckley does is like mostly the same patterns every time, with small variations and needing to pre-crease everything every time. And it's like, yeah, that's not the variation that I find interesting. So having a grid and then folding whatever the heck I want, or really what I usually do is decide what I want to fold and then make a grid that's custom to that pattern. That feels more interesting to me. Now, I don't spend a lot of time reverse engineering other people's models anymore. I did in the beginning, but other people have their own style and I have mine, so I tend to stick to my own designs. Getting there. I think one more edge and will be around this ring around the center. So now we're right around an hour and a half of folding the pattern, which is right about the same estimate I gave towards the beginning for how long, or actually no, I said 2 hours to fold the grid. And I will say this pattern is folding really quickly for a pattern on 80 grid divisions. Usually I would spend like 4 or more hours folding the design on 80 grid divisions. This one's going fast, which is why we'll actually get through it in one sitting. Okay, next ring around the center. We're finally in a place where like the whole bit that I've folded is filling up the screen. And this ring around. And I'm guessing, educated guess, that I'm going to be going all the way to the edge of the paper. It's not going to be that many more rings around. And that's going to be my double open triangle. And here we go. These moves are extremely familiar from what I've been folding. Just paying attention, especially as I come into these areas of what's my spacing of the rhombus on the opposite side. In this case, it's tube pleat spacing. That's going into a closed triangle twist. And I'll get that compound wrap in place. And then an opportunity here to get 2 rhombus twists in place. That one's going to be further out. There's the wrap. With that double open triangle. And closed triangle. It's interesting in this pattern, there are no open triangles, just closed and double open. And working my way around. Like I mentioned earlier about the choir songs running through my head, that's one of them. Yeah, so every time I start a new ring around the center, it takes longer to finish the ring. I mean, some of the rings go relatively quickly. but mostly towards the end, it's a while to get back around to the starting point. We're getting to a place where I could just finish one corner and show you how the rest of it would look, but I'm game to keep folding a bit longer. But definitely if we hit 2 hours, then I'm out. I do have some other things that I want to get done today. So yeah, I would say that it's fairly normal for me to fold for 2 hours straight, but I would usually at least like be changing posture a little bit, taking a photo with backlighting, something like that along the way. And yes, yeah, Chris, you're exactly correct about the pleats in those hexagons. So when, now I'll get to a hexagon in just a moment. When the hexagon is set up in that half hexagon tube, those pleats are zigzagging coming into them, and then you're exactly right that I do straighten those out by making sure the hexagon is fully twisted. So here I'm setting up part of a new hexagon and letting those plates zigzag underneath, and adding in a third one. And basically taking that tower and just compressing down on top. And then that's how this hexagon was set up. We can get those to straighten out by moving all those corners further around. So it looks like I'm going to be able to make it all the way around on this string and then do maybe a corner or two before noon my time. Which would be enough to see how the whole piece is done. You're welcome, Chris. This is something you could even try with a single hexagon or inside this pattern. And kind of the simpler way to do this pattern is, instead of doing the extra spacing in the center, just do tube pleat spacing, and then you'll have this hexagon, the triangle, again at tube pleat spacing, and then the closed triangle will act as a position of symmetry, and you won't have the spacing variation or the double open triangles to deal with, and it becomes a much simpler pattern. And actually the start of that pattern, Sawtooth, I taught in one of the Advent of Test series already. I want to say the 2023, but I'm not entirely certain on that. But if you have the Advent of Test course format, you'll see all of the series in there. That triangle is not quite so happy. It's okay. Yeah, as you get closer to the edge of the paper, different parts of the paper start wanting to do different things. So it's a little bit more challenging to keep everything where it's supposed to be. And that is the last rhombus of this ring around the center. Again, not the happiest rhombus. And final triangle. Let's see what happens on this corner. Going to have a new rhombus off of that pleat from the hexagon. And I should mention while I'm thinking about it, that's going to be a hexagon there. I should mention while I'm thinking about it that the other place where I teach that sawtooth pattern that I mentioned, that's the simplified version of this one, is in tessellation starter sequence. So so that is available in tutorial form with more repeats than in Advent of Tess. And I got a little lucky that that black spot on the paper is hidden under the folds. Let's see, this is going to be my far out rhombus feeding into the double open triangle. And that double open triangle is going to require a compound wrap. And as I'm setting up this rhombus, I may as well also set up this rhombus down below. And that's going to feed into this same partial hexagon that I saw up at the top of the corner. So those two are the same. It's just, so it's exactly the same pleats going into it. And I'll be able to get it fully rotated around with less layers sitting underneath it, less prone to folding open again once I get the very last of the corner folded. And to get the rest of the corner, I'm just going to go ahead and start this one that's already set up. I know it's feeding back into a new rhombus, just feeding back into a triangle that's feeding into another partial hexagon there. And both of those triangles will be closed. And so it's kind of a choice that we have whether to leave these guys as is to do something else with them. Like I could just do a pleat overlap there, tuck it away. Could twist it around, which would require me to fold a half rhombus twist, which I don't really want to do. So actually I'm liking this kind of tucked back or back twisted half hexagon for the edge there. And I should end up with 3 per edge. So that's what's going on, and we're right at the 2nd hour. So I will leave it at that. I'm going to go ahead and finish these other 5 corners on my own, and let's do a little bit of backlighting to finish up. We've got that central pattern feeding out into the positions of 2- and 3-fold symmetry. It repeats of the center that are fully surrounded by those other positions at the edge. So, well, and also the other side of the paper, we can see it looks more cryptic from this side because we're just seeing the triangle twists before the paper is illuminated. And then we can see all the details with the light. You're welcome, Erlu. And happy folding, everyone. Happy Thanksgiving if you celebrate it. And see you not for a live stream for a while, but for Advent of Tess. There's daily tutorials coming December 1st through 25th. And then I'll take a break from live streams after that until the 2nd Tuesday in January. So happy folding, everyone, and see you later.